Hey there, guys. This is Cole. Welcome back to another movie review. Welcome back to Halloween Horror Movie Reviews Season 1, Episode 11. And today's horror movie I'm going to be reviewing for this episode is the 1985 classic vampire movie, Fright Night. So what is the plot to the 1985 movie Fright Night for those who don't know? The plot of the movie is as follows. Teenager Charlie Brewster is a horror movie junkie, so it's no surprise when a reclusive new neighbor, Jerry Dan when a new neighbor, Jerry, moves next door, Charlie Brewster becomes convinced he is a vampire. After strange events begin to occur, Charlie has no choice but to turn to the only person who could possibly help, washed up television vampire slayer Peter Vincent. So that's the basic plot synopsis to the movie, and this is a movie that I had first heard about this movie back in 2020, but I didn't get around to watching this movie until 2023 now I do not have it with me at the moment, but I bought a four horror movie collection at Walmart on DVD for only $7.47 back 2 years ago, and this was one of the movies that came in that collection set. The only reason I don't have that on me right now is because my sister borrowed it and she wants to watch the original Fright Night and she hasn't seen that movie yet. But anyways, so let's get to the review. So anyways, when it comes to this movie, how was the 1985 movie Fright Night received when it came out? When Fright Night released in the US on August 2nd, 1985, it received positive reviews from critics and audiences and was a big hit at the box office, making $24.9 million worldwide on a $9.5 million budget. A few years after this, Tom Holland, no, not Spider-Man, the director Tom Holland, who directed this movie, because of the success of this movie, was hired to direct the 1988 horror movie Child's Play, the first movie in the Chucky franchise, which that's a great movie, that's a horror classic. And this movie was so popular that this movie was such a big hit that it had a sequel in 1988 and then a remake in 2011 starring Colin Farrell, which I have not yet seen the remake, but I have heard good things about it, same with the sequel. As for my reaction to the movie, again, like I said, I first watched this movie 2 years ago in 2023, and I absolutely loved it. Not only is Fright Night 1985 one of my favorite horror movies of all time, it's one of my favorite movies of all time in general, and my second favorite vampire movie behind The Lost Boys. I would really praise it that much. So without further ado, let's get into the review. The movie and by the way, there will be spoilers, so if you guys have not yet seen this movie, I would recommend it. In fact, currently at the moment, this movie is free on Tubi, and don't quote me on this. I think it might also be free on Prime Video. I don't know for sure, but anyways, the original Fright Night is a great movie, but without further ado, let's get into the review. So the movie starts off where a TV is on in the background with a TV show about a vampire hunter named Peter Vincent who basically slays a female vampire. While this is going on, Charlie, the main character of the movie, Charlie Brewster, and his girlfriend Amy are making out on his bedroom floor. The TV narrates, "This is Peter Vincent bringing you Fright Night Theater." But then when Charlie is kissing Amy, Amy says, "Charlie, Peter Vincent is on." But then Charlie says, forget him." But then I like the part when Amy says, but then Amy says to him, "But you love him." Then Charlie says, "But I love you more." And I gotta admit, like, that scene was funny, just, something, I don't know, just something about the way that Charlie Brewster said that line of dialogue was funny. But then, not long after that, Amy pushes Charlie off of him and she basically says, "Charlie, stop it." So then they get into an argument, and Charlie says, "We've been going together for almost a year, and all I ever hear is Charlie, stop it." But then Charlie says, "I'm sorry, Amy." And then Amy says, "Me too. And then Amy says, "Me too. I'm just scared, that's all." Not long after that, Charlie sees two men carrying what looks like a coffin next door outside his bedroom window, and Charlie tells Amy that he sees two people carrying a coffin, but she doesn't believe him, and Amy thinks that he doesn't care for her, so Amy decides to leave Charlie's room and goes downstairs. And Charlie says to her, "Okay, maybe it wasn't a coffin, but I did see two people carrying something in that backyard." But then Amy and him get into an argument before Charlie's mom interrupts and asks, "What's going on?" And then Charlie says nothing. And then Charlie walks into the living room, and while this is going on, Charlie's mom is talking to Amy and says to her, "Oh, Amy, will you remind your mother we are playing poker at this house this weekend?" But then while this is going on, Charlie is looking out the window in the living room, spying on the neighbors. The next day, Charlie is at school with his friend Ed Thompson, who is played by Stephen Jeffrey, who I'm not all too familiar with as an actor, but I thought the actor gave a good performance as his friend. And and one thing I like about this movie, I love the scene when Amy walks past Charlie, ignoring him, and then the character Ed Thompson says to Charlie, she's like, "Oh, did she finally find out what you're like?" And that scene was funny. Just the way that Ed said that line of dialogue was pretty funny. And I gotta say, one thing this movie does a really good job at is having the perfect balance of horror when it needs to be there, and the comedic bits when they need to be there as well. But then Charlie says to Ed, "Oh, buzz off, evil." like that was funny. Another thing I think works really well about this movie is the great character work. This movie has a whole great set of characters. You got Charlie, Ed, Amy, Peter Vincent, Jerry, the detective Lennox, and Billy. All of them are great characters, played wonderfully by the cast. Later that night, Charlie is in his bedroom studying for an upcoming pop quiz, and while this is going on, Peter is he's basically looking at his bedroom window, upstairs, and Peter hears a scream across his upstairs bedroom window, and then a light in the house turns off. And the next day at school, Amy apologizes to Charlie, and she says that "Oh, I'm sorry, it was all my fault, all this and that." And they start to get along again. But then while this is going on, Charlie stares at the school TV, and the school TV is narrating, "Police have discovered the second victim in 2 days," which I'm sure you know what type I'm referring to. But anyways, a type of victim that went to sleep forever. But anyways, getting back to the review, and then the TV says the second victim, the second victim, who was found earlier in the morning, was a known prostitute and stuff like that. But then Charlie is convinced that the next door neighbor is a vampire. And he's also convinced that the neighbor, Jerry, is responsible for the disappearance, as he heard a woman scream the previous night. And I love the whole part when Charlie is distracted by the news on the TV, and Amy's upset that he's not listening, and then she just smears a bunch of food in his face, and then Ed laughs at it. I thought that was a funny scene. Later that day, after school, Charlie decides to spy on the neighbor's house, and we see a window being painted gray by Jerry's partner, Billy Cole. Before Charlie is able to open the doors on the ground to go underground, Billy basically busts him in the act and asks Charlie what is he doing, but then Charlie says nothing, and then Billy says, "Good. Let's make sure it stays that way." But then Charlie goes home. Later that night with binoculars, Charlie through his window is spying on the neighbors. And while this is going on, Charlie eventually does pass out from sleeping in his chair, but he does wake up pretty late at night, and he sees that in the window next to him, the main vampire villain of the movie, Jerry, who, believe it or not, he sees that the main vampire villain, Jeremy, is about to bite a woman on the neck, but Jeremy sees Charlie spying on him and closes the window so Charlie can't see it. And another thing I forgot to mention, the bad guy of this movie is actually played by Chris Sarandon, the actor who voiced Jack Skellington in the 1993 Disney classic movie, The Nightmare Before Christmas, which I love that movie. I will try to review that this October if I get the chance, but if not, I could review it for Christmas because, I mean, you know, it is the type of movie that you could watch on either holiday. But anyways, getting back to the review. But then there's the whole scene where Charlie rushes to wake his mom up to convince her that they have to leave the house, but she doesn't listen to him and goes back to sleep as she's half awake when she hears it. Charlie rushes outside in a hiding spot to spy on the neighbors and sees Billy, which is Jerry's accomplice, or basically Jerry's brother, carrying a trash bag with a person in there who went to sleep forever, if you catch my drift. Charlie's mom runs outside, calling his name. Charlie runs inside and drags his mother in, but then there's the whole scene where Charlie tries to convince his mom that the guy next door has fangs and is responsible for the recent crimes going on, and that Jeremy is a vampire, and the mom in disbelief says, "A what?" And then the next day, Charlie tells the same thing to Amy, and Amy is in disbelief and thinks Charlie is telling her this to win her back. But then Charlie says, "Forget it, I'm going to the police." And then Amy says, "You can't go to the police with a story like that. They'll lock you up." Then Charlie says, all right, then I will not tell him he's a vampire, but I will tell him about the two women." But then there's a police detective named Detective Lennox who arrives with Charlie to the neighbor's house, and Billy Cole opens to the door to let the main detective in, and he tells him that he's Jerry's brother. But then Charlie tells Detective Lennox and Billy that Billy is lying about the whole trash bag thing and that Jerry is a vampire, but both of them laugh. Then Detective Lieutenant Lennox escorts Charlie out of the house and then drives away from Jerry's house, telling him, if you call the police again, you'll go to jail permanently. Not long after that, Billy is staring right at Charlie outside. Charlie then runs to his car, closes the door, and speed drives to Ed Thompson's house. But then Charlie says, "The vampire knows I know about him, or he will tonight." And then Ed starts laughing. He says, "What are you talking about?" Charlie then says, "I have a vampire living right next to me, and he'll destroy me unless I protect myself." And then Charlie says, "Tell me how to protect myself." But then Ed laughs and says, "That's very funny, Brewster." But then Charlie says, "If you help me, I'll pay you $8. And then Ed agrees because of money. And then Ed says, "Where and when do you expect the vampire to attack?" And then Charlie says, "In my bedroom tonight." But then Ed gives Charlie a golden small cross and says, "Start with this, but you must have total faith in it for it to work." And not long after that, Ed continues on his sentence, and Ed says, "Put links of garlic around your neck and hang them from your window. If he comes for you, that will be the way. Then there's holy water, but a priest has to say a blessing over it first." Later that night, Charlie nails his window shut, and then he's called downstairs by his mom and saying, "We gotta come meet the new guest," and then Charlie goes downstairs. to meet the guest that Charlie's mom invited over, which of course is Jerry, the main villain of the movie. However, Charlie's mom does not know that he's a vampire, and there's the whole scene where Jerry is talking to Charlie and he says, "Hello, Charlie." And then and then I like the part when the mom says, "Charlie, don't be rude, shake hands." And then Charlie then says, "What's he doing here?" And then Charlie's mom said, "I invited him over for a drink." And then I like the part when Jerry says, "What's the matter, Charlie? Afraid I'd come over without being invited first?" And then him and Charlie's mom laugh, which I thought was a good scene. Jerry then says, "You're right. Of course, now that I've been made welcome, I will probably drop by quite a bit. In fact, anytime I feel like it, with your mother's kind permission, of course." Charlie then says to his mom he's fine, and then he goes behind the wall and runs up the stairs to his room. Later that night, Jerry goes to Charlie's mom's room where she is sleeping and closes Charlie's mom's bedroom door, basically sealing it shut, with splinters and stuff. Jerry then hides in Charlie's closet. Charlie goes to his room, and then he sees Jerry, but before Charlie can do anything, Jerry grabs Charlie, silencing his scream, and says, "We would not want to wake your mother now, would we?" But then he basically throws Charlie across the room, and Charlie slams into his closet door. He then grabs Charlie and says, "Do you realize how much trouble you have caused me, spying on me, almost disturbing my sleep this afternoon, telling policemen about me? You have something I don't, a choice. So tell you what. You forget about me and I'll forget about you. What do you say?" And while this is going on, Charlie is pinned to the wall and he pulls the golden holy cross out of his pocket, but it does nothing. But then Jerry is able to open Charlie's wooden window, and it basically sticks Charlie's head outside of it. Charlie grabs a pencil and puts it through Jerry's hand as self-defense, giving Charlie time to recover and get up. Then Jerry pulls the pencil out his hand, and now we see Jerry in full vampire form 31 minutes into the movie, but the build-up was worth it. Charlie's mom's door is sealed shut, of course, but then Charlie's mom is basically saying, "Charlie, I can't open my door." But then Jerry turns back into his normal human-looking form and quickly escapes the house. Charlie then goes to his mom's room and tells her he had a nightmare, and for her to go to sleep as Charlie's mom starts the night shift at work tomorrow. Charlie then gets a phone call from Jerry saying, "I know you're there, Charlie. I see you. What's the matter, Charlie? Scared? You started this, Charlie, and I'm gonna finish it." So basically, Jerry is out for revenge on Charlie. Not long after that, the TV is on, and Peter Vincent says on the TV, "I know vampires are real. I know vampires are real. I have defeated all the ones I have encountered." And then the next day, Charlie talks to Peter Vincent and he says, "It's very important." And Charlie says, "I was curious about what you said in Believe in Vampires on TV last night." And then Peter Vincent says, "What about it?" Charlie then says, "Were you serious?" And then Peter says, "Absolutely. But unfortunately, none of your generation seems to be. I have just been fired because no one wants to see vampire hunters anymore. Apparently, all they want is a demented madman running in a ski mask going after younger people." Which I liked that line of dialogue because I thought that was a very clever reference to the Friday the 13th movies, and it's a good coincidence they did that because Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning, came out the same year this movie did. Charlie then says, "I believe in vampires," and of course, this causes Peter Vincent to look at Charlie like he's insane, and then Charlie says, "In fact, I have one living next door next to me." And then I like the part when when Charlie says to Peter, "Would you like to help me destroy the vampire?" But then Peter says, "Pardon me?" And then Charlie tells Peter Vincent that Jeremy was responsible for what happened to the girl a few days ago. And then Peter Vincent says, "If this is your idea of a joke, I am not amused." And then Charlie says, "I'm not joking. I'm dead serious." Peter then says, "Oh well, if you'll excuse me." And then Charlie says, "You have to believe in and then Charlie's talking to him and he says, "You said you believe in vampires." And then Peter Vincent says, "I lied." And then he drives away from Charlie, so that attempt failed. But then Charlie's two best friends, Ed and Amy, arrive at Charlie's house, and Charlie is preparing to defeat the vampire, and he has a whole bunch of stuff in his room. And of course, his friends do not tell him because they don't want to upset him. But both Amy and Ed think that Charlie is insane, and basically Ed and Amy, they basically tell the main character Charlie that they are going to get Peter Vincent for Charlie to help defeat the vampire. However, when the friends leave, and I do like this scene when Charlie says to Amy, "Amy, you don't believe me, do you?" But then Amy says to him, "I love you, Charlie." But then not long after that, both Ed and Amy show up to Peter Vincent's apartment, and they basically tell Peter Vincent that they need his help to stop Charlie from destroying the next door neighbor, as Charlie thinks that the next door neighbor is a vampire, and Peter's like, "I know, the guy's clinically insane," and stuff like that. And at first, he wants nothing to do with it, but then Amy agrees to pay Peter Vincent, and she's like, "How much?" And Peter Vincent's like, "All right, how much?" And Amy says that she'll give him $500, and he agrees to it. So the plan basically is to shine a small handheld mirror on Jeremy to prove to Charlie that Jeremy's not a vampire, as vampires don't have reflections. Well, that's one of the plans, but basically the main plan is this. Basically, the main plan is they're basically gonna have him drink holy water to prove that he's not a vampire. We then cut to that scene when Peter Vincent is with Charlie and Charlie's friends, there to prove to him that Jerry is not a vampire. And there's the whole scene where Jerry, because the typical rule of vampires is, well, if they drink holy water, they should, burst into flames. But here's the weird thing, though. The main villain of the movie, Jerry, played by Chris Sarandon, he drinks the holy water, but he is not affected at all whatsoever. But then Peter says, "Well, Charlie, are you convinced now that Jeremy's not a vampire?" And then Charlie says, "It can't be." And then, now we're getting to my favorite scene of the movie. The whole scene where Peter Vincent opens up his handheld mirror, and the whole scene where Peter Vincent opens up his handheld mirror and sees that Jeremy has no reflection in the mirror and drops the mirror in shock as he gasps. That's a great scene. And then Jerry is basically asking Mr. Vincent, aka Peter Vincent, "Something wrong, Mr. Vincent?" And then Peter then laughs and he says, "No," he says, "not at all. It's just my clumsiness." But then Peter Vincent then walks the kids out the house and stuff like that. And then Charlie says, "All right, come on. There has to be something. You had to have seen something that convinced you he was a vampire." And then the whole part where Mr. Vincent says to him, "He had no reflection. There, you happy?" And he drives away. But then not long after that, there's the whole scene where Charlie is walking Amy, his girlfriend, home, and this does lead to a part I do like in the movie, where I do like the scene where Ed is walking in the alleyway separate from where Amy and his friend Charlie is, and then the whole scene where Ed pranks Charlie and Charlie believes he was bit by a vampire is a rather funny scene. But then not long after that, the main character Ed is in an alleyway by himself, and Ed gets bitten by Jerry, making him a vampire. But then, About close to the hour mark of the movie, Jerry then strikes a deal with Charlie that if he wants to see Amy alive, then to go to his house only with Charlie and Peter by themselves. Then the whole scene on the disco dance floor where Jerry is attacking a bunch of security guards is great. Even some people freak out and move out because they see that he's a vampire. Jerry then kidnaps Amy and drives away, and Ed, who is now a vampire, teams up with Jerry. I like when later on in the movie, Peter Vincent eventually agrees to help Charlie rescue Amy. The whole scene where Ed turns into a wolf and Peter battles it is great, where the wolf is about to attack, but the character Mr. Vincent is able to drive a stake through the wolf's heart, and then the wolf falls off the balcony on top of the chandelier and it falls on the ground with a stake driven through the wolf monster's heart. And Ed starts to turn back into a human and is defeated. And that's a rather tragic, well-done scene. Charlie then finds out that Amy was turned into a vampire. Peter then tells Charlie he basically tells Charlie if we defeat Jerry before dawn, Amy will go back to a human. But then Billy Cole is defeated, which is again Jerry's brother, is defeated with a stake through the heart. The whole scene where Peter tries to defeat Jerry with a cross at dawn is great, but then Jerry turns into a bat and tries to attack Peter, but Peter stops the bat from biting him with holding his head back by the neck. But then the sunlight destroys the bat. That's another good scene. And then we get to the epic finale where Amy is a vampire that Charlie must free from her curse by defeating another vampire. And the way that the last vampire gets defeated is rather good, where it basically bursts into flames with a bunch of sunlight on, and we see it's a giant bat skeleton, and then the movie ends on a good note where Charlie was able to get his girlfriend back as a human, and he's able to get back with her. And then the movie has a sequel bait ending where Vampire Ed is in the darkness giving him a maniacal laugh. So yeah, at the end of the day, I really like this movie. I guess really if I only have one flaw with it, I guess the only problem I have with this movie would be the sequel bait ending, but I haven't seen the sequel yet, so I'm sure that'll be rectified by the time. I'm sure that won't be an issue anymore by the time I watch the second movie, but yeah. Anyways, guys, that was my review for Fright Night, and on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm going to give Fright Night 1985 a 9 out of 10, and I would recommend that you add this movie to your collection, so yeah. Anyways, guys, that was my review, and we'll catch you guys later. Bye-bye now.